Hey everyone! So in this video, we're finally moving on from Aboriginal spirituality and going straight into the second part of the post-1945 syllabus, which is religious expression in Australia from 1945 to the present. Yeah, look, it isn't the best, but I'll try to get you through it the least painful way possible. So this video is running you through the first syllabus dot point for this section, which is on changing patterns of religious adherence. So the exact wording of the syllabus is outline changing patterns of religious adherence from 1945 to the present using census data. So the main things to pay attention to here are, first up, our key term is outline, which means we need to sketch in general terms and indicate the main features. Nothing too tricky. And then it's specifically telling us we need to use our census data. So we're basically just looking at how religion has changed in Australia over time and using the census to help us find some trends. So before we get ahead of ourselves, hold up for a minute. Some of you might be asking, what is census data and why on earth is it important for studying religion? So the census is held every 5 years in Australia by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And its job is to ask every single person in Australia a series of questions so that the government and researchers and, well, all of us who care have a better idea of exactly what Australia's population looks like. So an important part of the census is the question of religious affiliation. And these numbers about how many people follow each religion or have no religion allow us to be able to draw conclusions about how religion is changing in Australia. And that's exactly what our syllabus point is all about. Okay, so let's get straight into it and look at what census shows us about changing patterns of religion in Australia. So in this video, we're really just sticking to this census data and the trends we can find in the numbers. Then in our next video on the current religious landscape, we'll look more at the reasons behind these trends and the historical factors that have influenced them. So don't worry too much if I mention things like immigration in this video. That's just giving it a bit of context, and then we'll go into detail about that in the next video. So to structure this nicely, we're going to divide the data into 3 categories. First up, we'll look at the data that shows religious growth in Australia. Then we'll follow that up by looking at the religions that have declined. And then finally, we'll have a chat about non-religion and how it has changed as a category. Okay, so first up, religious growth. So religious growth is mainly seen outside of Christianity, especially in religions where high rates of immigration have boosted their populations. So in the 2016 census, 3 major religions, Islam, Hinduism, and Sikhism, showed growth in their numbers. So Islam grew from 2.2% of the Australian population in 2011 to 2.6% in 2016. So this is a 0.4% jump, which isn't too shabby, but it's still a pretty tiny proportion of the overall Australian population. But that doesn't really matter. What we're looking at is how much it itself has changed over time. So we can say that the trend here is that Islam has experienced huge growth since 1945. So only 0.3% of the Australian population recorded themselves as Muslim in the 1976 census. So this means that over the past 40 to 50 years, the overarching trend has been upward growth in the Muslim community. Okay, so then next up is Hinduism. So Hinduism saw a more dramatic jump from 1.3% in 2011 to 1.9% in 2016. So this means that Hinduism has grown to nearly 1.5 times the size it was in 2011, and that is pretty impressive. So again, this is mainly due to immigration trends. So Hinduism stood at only 0.1% in the 1986 census. So even though 1.9% still sounds tiny, it's actually proof of a pretty amazing and considerable rise in population over the past 40 years. And then last up is the something of a wild card of growth religions, Sikhism. So Sikhism managed to jump from 0.3% in 2011 to 0.5% in 2016. So again, tiny numbers here, but this does mean that they have doubled their population in under a decade. So obviously the trend we can say here is intense upward growth. Okay, so now let's move right over and look at the religions that didn't fare too well in the 2016 census and have declined in numbers. So our main groups here are Judaism, Buddhism, and Christianity. But then because Christianity is a mammoth, we need to break this down and look specifically at the different denominations of Christianity. So first up, Judaism. So Judaism has declined, but only the tiniest bit, from 0.5% in 2011 to 0.4% in 2016. So this tiny drop shows a pretty consistent trend. So this is a very long-term pattern for Judaism. So huge Jewish migration happened after the Second World War. So this means that the population has stood at around 0.4% from 1947 and has barely changed since then. So this is a trend of unbelievably consistent numbers. Buddhism has also stayed fairly consistent, dropping the tiniest bit from 2.5% to 2.4%. But from 1972 up until 2011, Buddhism had been experiencing significant growth in line with immigration patterns. So now let's tackle the beast that is Christianity. So the overall percentage of Australians who identified as Christian in 2016 was 52%, down from 61.1% in 2011. So that's quite a drop there. So Catholicism has had a hard 5 years, dropping from 25.3% to 22.6% in 2016. But despite that, it is still the biggest Christian denomination in Australia. The second largest is Anglicanism, but this has fallen even harder, from 17.1% down to 13.3%. The trend here is, without a doubt, huge decline in Christian adherence. So to look at a few other denominations to show this, we can see that the Presbyterian branch dropped from 2.8% to 2.3%, which is significant but not huge. And then the Uniting Church had a more substantial drop, from 5% to 3.7%. Then finally, the Eastern Orthodox dropped from 8.4% to 8.2% in 2016. So even though each denomination has their own thing going here and has different factors that influence its decline in numbers, as a general conclusion, we can say that the trend within Christianity is significantly declining adherence. So as all of these numbers drop, it's no coincidence that we see a huge hike in the number of people putting no religion down on their census. So this has risen enormously, from 22.3% in 2011 to 30.1% in 2016. And if there's one stat for you guys to learn, let me tell you, this is it. Because this number is, quite frankly, ridiculous. And the media seems to agree with me on this one. So the numbers have doubled in under 20 years. So the trend here is that this number is only set to grow higher in the future. And this is really symptomatic of the decline of traditional religion, as well as the growth of heaps of different non-religious schools of thought. So this is things like humanism and agnosticism. Before I leave you in a heap on the floor trying to come to grips with those numbers, here's a bit of exam prep to make you guys feel better. So in your study notes, make sure you're sticking to that growth, decline, and non-religion model, instead of just copying and pasting the table from the Bureau of Statistics. That table of numbers is not going to go into your brain as much as you stare at it. You really need to be color coding here to help your memorization. And look, if your exam is tomorrow and you're freaking out hardcore about these numbers, the best strategy is just to choose a few really key religions and just nail those numbers and don't worry about the rest. But as I said, that is a really last minute fix. And for the actual HSC, you're gonna want to know all of this stuff. Okay guys, so that's it for today. Bye!